Welcome to another episode of We Are Carbon. I'm Helen Fisher and I'm joined by Peter Lundgard, regenerative farmer and consultant in Alberta, Canada. Throughout the episodes on this podcast, the topics have been varied, but they've also continually highlighted the value and significance of our soils here on Earth. Not only have we learnt of soil's ability to capture and hold on to carbon, but also how this assists in stabilising microclimates, building resilience through holding on to water and supporting communities of microbes, which further support the climate by assisting plants to grow and thrive. The whole thing is both perpetual and interconnected. Each aspect couldn't thrive in the absence of the others. They are a system, an ecosystem. We've also considered how this system of growth can support our needs as a society, providing food, bioplastics, construction materials, textiles, fuel, medicine, pretty much anything that we need. We can be self-sustaining when we manage things holistically. But to think and work in a whole system way is so very different to what we're used to. Though the potential to provide for our needs and regulate the climate at the same time offers an enormous motivation to get our heads around this. Farmers who can lead the way in this area should be put in the spotlight right now. And it is an absolute gift that Peter has offered to share his knowledge from several decades of experience with us. An early adopter of the work of Alan Savory and incorporating wisdom from Indigenous communities, along with the work of William Albrecht and others. Since the late 80s, Peter has built a now thriving farm that has gained economic stability through first building ecological stability. His own 12-step programme draws together influences from both study and practice to help others to navigate the approach of holistic management. He talks us through each of these steps. There's a lot of information, so we skirt through some, but do let me know if there's anything here that you'd like to be covered in greater depth. You can keep up to date with everything from We Are Carbon by subscribing over on the website, wearecarbon.earth, or find us on Instagram, at wearecarbon.earth. Right, let's get stuck in. Hi Peter, I wanted to introduce you to everybody before we get into the actual chat. So you started, previous to your work that we're going to discuss today, in regenerative agriculture. You had more of an industrial farming background. So how did you get into the new way that you do the process today?
I guess I have to give a little background. I was born and raised on a farm in northwestern Alberta in Canada in the 1960s, and then in the 70s I decided to go into farming as a career. When I grew up on the farm, it was more or less traditional type agricultural practices, mixed farm, and as I decided to make a career of it, I went to college at the agricultural college in our community, and I studied agriculture, and it was more or less it was more of a industrial type agricultural programs that they were teaching there. So I was fortunate enough to have some old school instructors, so they were very beneficial to my career. And so and I still have a mentor that one of them is I still seek advice from him to this day. He's getting up there in years, but anyways, I was very fortunate to have that, and we started in the late 1970s in farming, and then my wife joined me in the early 80s. For about 10 years, we were maybe trapped or stuck into this system of agriculture production system, and so as it went, we joined into that, and we invested heavily in financed a farm, and et cetera, et cetera. And then about 10 years later, everything went backwards on us and south on us, and the interest rates went as high as 28% and per annum, and so we just abruptly lost our farm one day, and so we had to start all over again in 1988. And so with a young family, we started a new farm, and we were able to lease some land and with a rental purchase arrangement, and so we decided then to take a different approach to agriculture. The approach was more of a traditional agricultural system that I grew up with as a young child, and it was a little bit of chaotic because we had to start over with nothing, and we were kind of breaking new ground then, so to speak, because a lot of that old traditional practices had become kind of went by the wayside. And so, but we were very lucky in the early 1990s to get onto a model of decision-making model, which is called holistic management today. So helped us tremendously to set us on a new direction and into the regenerative agricultural system that we've kind of developed over our career. And so what I'm going to share with you is just my experience as a farmer, and through the decades, and how we got to where we are today with regenerative agriculture.
Yeah, fantastic. So the reason that you got into it was financial as much as to have the environmental benefit. It actually, from a business model point of view, it had failed you, the standard approach.
Yeah, the late 70s, early 80s is when there was quite a bit of change happening in the agricultural systems. A lot of the farms were getting bigger and bigger, and a lot of the smaller farms kept disappearing. And so I guess we were kind of that system wouldn't work for us, and it based on our size and whatnot. So it that system kind of failed, and so then that's why we seeked out a different approach. And I felt that it was, if we go back to some of the more traditional practices that we did as I grew up, when I was growing up, that of course those were seen as being backwards maybe at the time, or because there was a lot of push, or a lot of advertisements, and a lot of for this new type of agricultural system, which we see a lot of today.
Yeah. So it's completely at odds with the training and the modern approach. You've kind of gone back in time and took a gamble a little bit.
Yes, and we just started to think about things a little deeper, and for a few years we struggled. My wife was with me then. She came on in the early 80s, and we started raising our family, and I think it was 1988 is when from 1978 I started buying land and started farming, and then 10 years later I lost everything, and so then we decided to start over again, and so that's what we did. So we thought, well, let's try to take a different approach. So it wasn't until that was in 1988, and it wasn't until we struggled for a few years, and then 1992 is when we got onto the holistic management decision-making model, and then actually then we haven't really looked back. It's just been great.
So you put your faith in the holistic management model. How did you come across that?
I guess at the time it was early 1992, I believe it was, and there was this group that was organizing these courses. So I decided it sounded what might fit just perfect for what we wanted to do, and or what I was looking at doing. To be honest, I didn't understand it I didn't understand it until we studied it, but it sounded like that was the tool we needed to take us in, to help us make better decisions. And so we started studying it, and then of course we haven't quit studying it. So it's just
it must have worked well, because it's all these decades later you're actually based your own consultancy on it. So it's it's proof really in the effect, the success of it. It's doing a marvelous job for you. And this is even all these years later, we're still, from a mainstream point of view, we're overlooking the holistic approach, aren't we?
yeah, you're right. It's a slow. Not many people that it's not have taken it up. They're the ones that have made significant changes in the ecological and economical beings of their farms, and I guess that's why we keep trying to teach people and trying to pass on some of the things that we've gained to try to expand that knowledge. And so yeah, it's unfortunate, but I guess the holistic management model is based on a value-driven decision-making process rather than just straight production based vision process. So it's got more of a maybe a longer term type vision to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think anything that we take a holistic view of, whether that you're not got that black and white direct connection between the action that you're inputting and that direct, okay, it's going to have this output. We like if we think of our own personal health holistically, you're not looking at the symptom and kind of trying to numb it. You're looking at the bigger picture. So it's not something that, like you just said, it's a more long-term thought process. What kind of scale, what type of scale farm does it suit? Can it be micro and really huge, or is it a particular size that it suits best?
Well, holistic management model it's a decision making process, and it can be applied to anything. So it can be it's not it's not just agriculture. It can be applied to businesses or just in your life in general. So anyways, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, yeah. It basically, we're not talking about something specific. We're talking about a mindset. We're talking about a rule set, if you like. And you've called it a program, a 12-step program for your own particular variant. You're teaching this to other farmers. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. So I think the first one, I've got this written down as become highly effective. And this is something that certainly is one of the steps that in particular we can apply for anything that we do, anything at all. But if you want to just briefly go through how that one looks.
Yeah, this step number one is become highly effective. And I guess we've studied that with Stephen Covey was one of the people that wrote a book on that, but we've also taken some of the knowledge from the indigenous community. The 7 steps there is being proactive and beginning with the end in mind and putting first things first and thinking win-win, and then seeking to understand and then be understood, and recognizing another step is recognizing synergism with 1 + 1 is greater than 2, and then the final one is to become highly effective is to become stronger with your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual being, and so that's number one. Those 7 steps to become highly effective.
Yeah, and that sounds, there's 7 steps in there, so there's a whole lot of value to be explored within that one step alone. But I think for now, if we work through these so we can just give a picture of the 12, that first step, it becomes very clear that we're talking about a practice that's of a very different point of view to what you would expect to learn if you went to college and learn about industrial agriculture. We're already setting a picture here of something entirely different in its approach.
This is correct. Yeah, this is, and keep in mind that this is what I've experienced in my farming career. So, and I just thought this should be shared, and this is what I try to teach people. So we can go on to number 2 whenever you feel comfortable.
Yeah, I think number 2, it sort of ties everything into what we've already mentioned.
Yes, number 2 is holistic decision-making model, and so that's the course that we'd taken in the early 1990s, and and put into practice, and we still keep learning how to incorporate that. Of course, we keep learning with step 1 too, to be highly effective. It's very hard to do some of these things, but the most important thing is that you're aware of them, and so you keep trying to work at those things and always keep them in mind when you're doing things. So, but they're not easy. They're if you go through them 7 steps and through the holistic model, it sometimes becomes hard to do these things, but at least you're aware of them and trying to do them. I always say an inch ahead is better than going backwards or not moving at all. So
yeah, absolutely. Sometimes we don't have the full answer, but at least we're pushing in the right direction.
Yeah.
And yeah. So the holistic decision making, number 2, how does that look like in practice?
Well, I always go through it quickly with people. Like you have a goal, and it's a 3-part goal. That's what you value in life, and then forms of production. You establish who the people are and what resources you have, and so they sit down and develop that 3-part goal. Then there's 7 testing guidelines that we use to test a decision or action against that 3-part goal that we've developed as a group. Then the 7 testing guidelines are they come into play, and one of the ones that are very important to us is the what effect does this decision or action have on the ecosystem? And the ecosystem, there's 4 pillars to a healthy ecosystem. There's a water cycle, mineral cycle, sun's energy flow, and then the dynamics of the community. If you increase the dynamics in the community, then you help out the other 3 blocks, or vice versa. If you help out any one of those 4 pillars, that you're going to enhance the other 3. And it seems if you degress any one of those 4 pillars, you're going to affect the other 3. So that's really the cornerstone or the building blocks of the regenerative agriculture, is to focus on that in particular. And then of course the other test. So every time you do a plan or do an action or make a decision, then you test it to say how is it affecting those ecosystem blocks. And of course then you put a lot of thought into it and how to enhance them. And so that's been the really great tool that we've had on our farm. And then of course the other one that's really had a huge impact on my life was cause and effect. You look for the root cause of the problem rather than just dealing with symptoms. And so that one in itself it's taken me from how the animals are doing to how the plants are doing, because I'm looking for the root cause of the problem, and then I go plants down to the soil, and then from the soil I go through the still looking deeper. I look for into the science of soil and its chemistry and physics and biology, and so I keep looking at those, and that's what's taken me down to the soil sciences and studying soil chemistry and soil biology. And so it all starts from that one simple testing guideline, cause and effect. And so those 2 have been really those 2 testing guidelines have made such a difference in the way we've developed our career, our farming career, how it's developed for us over the years. And so that's just 2 of the 7.
Yeah, you can feel here. There's so much information. It's already. I think that what you're demonstrating, there's a clear point here that says we can't just look at the surface. We've got to go deeper if we want to understand how to be regenerative, how to be sustainable, and how to be healthy. And clearly your model is taking account that the ecosystem itself has value, that the cause and effect of the soil life is contributing to the health of the animal and ultimately also to the nutritional value of the food. Because we hear today, I hear this a lot, where we're sort of demonizing certain food types as whether this is unhealthy or this is healthy. And I think that that's taken away from the holistic effect you're talking about, where actually you're considering the food that you end up with at the end of the story. It's actually contributed to along the full journey, and you end up with a different product essentially.
Exactly. I never mentioned the people component of it. The food, that's the end goal. That's good, and it all comes from the soil. And so to have healthy people, we have to really have healthy soil. And the point here is the decision-making model makes us more aware of that, and why is people's health deteriorating. And so one of the main reasons for that is the food that they're eating, and the food that they're eating is the nutrient density of it is. I mean, we study traditional diets and what the works of, say, Weston A. Price and people of that, and William Albrecht. They've identified that the nutritional value of the food is basically defines how the society, the group, the people, how healthy they are, and of course that, and then the work of William Albrecht takes it right down into the soil and the sciences of the soil. And so that one, it's really taken me a long ways, just that one testing guideline.
Yes, I can see this. It's demonstrating that the meaning of holistic management to us, because it's saying we look at the big picture. We don't go symptom solution. We have to look at everything as though it is connected to many steps along the web, and that's beautiful. I really think that this is this is at the crux of what people need to understand, is that food and nutrition and health are interconnected, and also that can't be separated from the way that we farm, the way that we treat the environment. The whole ecological system is connected, and when we look at it holistically, then we can really appreciate why that is. And that brings us to the soil ultimately, and that is number 3 on your list, is mineral balanced soils.
Yes. As I went down my farming career journey with that holistic management model, it took me deeper and deeper, and it made me more aware and made me more curious to what's going on and why. And so that took me right into the soil, and into the soil biology and physics and chemistry. And so then I really started studying the works of William Albrecht. He identified the soil chemistry, how it affected the soil biology, and how that ultimately affected the soil. Both of those things affected the soil, the physical structure of the soil. So that's why I put that one as number 3, with a balanced mineral balanced soil. You have the mineral balance for the plant growth, and then the plant material is going to be nutrient dense, and so the livestock and ultimately the people eating that food. So that's number 3. That's and it's very crucial and important, especially when regenerative agriculture. I also focus on the ecological and economical aspects of it, and so that mineral balanced soil, I can't say enough about it.
Yeah. Is it something that is drastically at odds if we go the industrial agricultural route? Do you see something in the soil, within the minerals itself, within the composition of the soil? Is that impacted by, say, fertilizers and ploughing?
Yes, the industrialized agricultural model, or whatever we want to term it as, this monocultural cropping systems and whatnot, and marketing systems that have developed over the last 5 decades or so. From what my experience is, I've got some pictures of soil where the old fence lines were, and they've taken out the old fence line that had been in there for, maybe 60 years, and worked it up to move the fence line because the property line was out, and the soil is just dark black, or dark color, and right beside it just white color. So the carbon is gone, and so we this model has been mining of carbon, basically, and so we have to replenish that carbon, and we have to and in order to replenish that carbon, it goes back to plant growth, and that's down some of the other steps, but ultimately we have to, the mineral balancing that soil becomes very crucial to get that process back in working again for us. And this other monoculture cropping and just and then harvesting crops year after year, and some of our soils aren't well suited for that neither. So we see a lot of that happening in our region, in our province, in our country, or that a lot of the soils they're not deep soils, and they're not rich in carbon, and so it doesn't take long to deplete them, and they're not mineral balanced to start with for the most part. So this is it's having quite a bad effect on our soil, and we see lots of soil erosion. And I notice people don't stop and really take into account the value of that soil that's being eroded, and a lot of this is due to annual monoculture cropping and the high use of commercial type fertilizers and etc. So from what I see, that is it's not very sustainable, and so that's why I really focus more and go down the path of regenerative agriculture.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we just kind of put that holistic point of view on this eroded soil, could we connect that with other issues that are besides food, that are, like flooding and this type of thing, where the water itself is penetrating differently because of how the soils have depleted?
Oh yes, carbon. When you lose the carbon in your soil, the carbon is that's really one of the main things that holds on to the water. And it's not only that; it's when you start building soil structure with regenerative principles, practices, then you get tremendous water holding capability. So some of the other steps that we're going to talk about, we focus on those steps in order to alleviate that problem of water and soil erosion. They're very important, and that's why I've included them. And a lot of people are starting to adopt those principles, and which is great, because as we go further through the 12 steps, you'll see how that comes into play.
Fantastic. So number 4, we've got create diverse ecosystems. And this, I think, is, it speaks worlds of how you're taking an approach that is respectful and valuing of the whole and of nature itself. And is that that's not just to be kind to nature, this is because it's adding value to the farming practice as well?
Yes, creating diverse ecosystems goes back to one of the testing guidelines that I mentioned earlier. The foundation blocks of a healthy ecosystem is the water cycle, mineral cycle, sun's energy flow, to capture sun's energy with the photosynthesis and creating biomass, and also creating diversity in the species. So that is truly what builds a healthy ecosystem. So that's why it becomes so important. It's sort of one of the steps of the foundation blocks of a healthy ecosystem: diversity. And people don't see the benefits of it. And when you add a new species into the ecosystem, how it's going to affect their blocks. So that's so important. So, and a good example of that is just by adding livestock to your farm, generally cattle, because cattle are one of the most easily used tools that are available to us. Of course, there's sheep and other ruminant type animals, but the cattle are the biggest part of it. So just by adding those into your farming operation, you've just totally changed the whole ecosystem around. And it's just, and I see it time and time again. And of course, when I grew up as a child, and that was always part of the that's something that we'd lost sight of. And so I'm just trying to say, let's focus on that. And through the 12-step program, like create diverse ecosystems, the main ideas are to create a diverse ecosystem with plant species and animal species.
Yeah, which essentially, I suppose, is going to have then diversity of insects, different pollinators, different pest balance within the ecosystem too. Is that right?
Exactly. Like, part of our farming operation is livestock, cattle, and we've over the years we've raised sheep and hogs, but also leafcutter bees. We raise the leafcutter bee, and that's a special bee that's just used for pollination, and it's not for honey production. So the more species you have, just the better your ecosystem becomes. And something that's really important in that, and when you have a healthy ecosystem, it adds stability to your production and also profitability. So that's I can't stress that enough, that profitability is so important, and adding diversity to your into your farm operation ecosystem creates profitability and stability and profitability. So with that diversity, you take away a lot of the risk in farming. So because in farming there's a lot of risk, you have a lot of risk with weather and particular weather and issues that we'll talk about later. But the more diverse your ecosystem is, the more stable it becomes, and with stability becomes profitability. So that's one of the ways to eliminate risk, is to create diversity in the ecosystem. So, and of course, that goes right back to the holistic model that we always keep looking at diversifying our ecosystem. So it's been a great one. So I think that's why it's number 4.
Yeah, it's there. It's kind of the absolute opposite of what we see with monocultures then. So a monoculture is saying, well, we'll take a simple approach and we'll just do the same thing over acre of one crop. And ultimately that must be the least diverse option we could have, which is why it isn't resilient, I suppose. That must be quite, it needs the inputs to control pests, and it's going to have a serious impact by an extreme weather event, this kind of thing. Is this where the diversity assists?
Exactly. With simplicity, like in monoculture cropping, it becomes more higher risk. One early frost can wipe your whole crop out. That system becomes very unstable. And of course, that's why they have to have all these prop up programs and to keep that system going, because it's really lacks diversity, and it's very unstable, and it becomes very unprofitable, because one frost or one weather event can pretty well ruin your financial pick for the whole year, and ultimately for the whole farming career in some cases.
You're not actually using each one of these as a profit marker. You're not saying, well, we're going to put in the bees to create honey. But at the end of the day, you're saying that by being diverse, even though it's indirect, it is keeping a stable and increasing profit as the outcome.
Yeah, exactly. Because like some of the species might be native species that come into your farm, and you're not going to be marketing them as per se, like it could be an animal species or a plant species, but just by them being on your farm, it adds diversity, and of course then the livestock that you might be going to harvest to market is enhanced. So yeah, it's just not necessarily something that you're going to be marketing. It's there to enhance the products that you are going to market. And so a lot of times we have to focus. We try not to focus on the invasive species per se. We just focus on the one that we're targeting and try to enhance it. That's one of the testing guidelines, as a weak link, and there's three parts to the weak link, and one of them is the solar chain and photosynthesizing sun's energy, and then converting it to something and marketing it, and ending up with a solar dollar. And then there's the other aspect of the human one of if your people have a problem or something, that's you got to address that as a weak link area. But there's another one, and the reason I'm talking about it is the biological weak link. And so when we have a undesirable species, then we try to discredit it or at its weakest point in its life cycle. And the species that we want to enhance or encourage, then we nurture them at their weakest point in their life cycle. And so that's some of the ways that you can deal with more undesirable species in your ecosystem.
Okay, so one more thing, just on the ecosystem side of things, coming back to the cattle, you described them as I don't know if you used the word tool, but they're essentially they're acting as a job, helping to grow the ecosystem, which I find quite interesting. It's like you're using the natural instincts and activity of the animal to serve the land and to become part of the whole.
That's exactly it. So the tool then becomes the cow becomes the tool to harvest the grass, and of course that's part of the solar chain. Like when we go back to the foundation blocks of the ecosystem, you've got mineral cycle, water cycle, diversity, and the succession, whether you take it to advanced succession or digress succession in your diversity of your ecosystem. But the other one in there, the fourth one is the solar chain, the sun's energy. And so we're trying to capture the sun's energy through photosynthesis with plant material. That's an energy conversion from the sun to the plant. And then you have to have a product conversion. You have to convert that plant into a product that you can market. And so either by harvesting with a machine or with a livestock or an animal, then you get a product. And that product might be in the form of protein from the animal, the cow in that case. And then you can market that. And that's part of the solar chain, the marketing. And then you get a solar dollar. And then that solar dollar, you either spend it in some way that enhances your quality of life, or you reinvest it. And so that's part of the whole chain. And so the cow then becomes a tool to do your product conversion. And so I always tell people that the least number of cows you have to get the job done, the better off you are. So you use your tools wisely. And so the ultimate goal is to end up with that solar dollar. And in the process, you build stability, add to your ecosystem foundation blocks, because the more you add to them, the better it gets, and the more productivity you're going to have, and the more solar dollars you're going to have to put towards reinvestment or to put towards what you want as a quality of life.
Yeah. So we have we've got a system that has become normal, where we've got a field full of one crop, and then we've got what has become quite problematic, which is livestock kept in quite unsatisfactory conditions. And they are, we hear a lot about the negative impact of cows and the farming where they're in feedlots. So what you're doing with the holistic model is integrating the meat production back into the land itself and making the animal a benefit to the ecosystem, as opposed to that separating things out where then you've got two negative situations.
Exactly. Yeah. So the feedlot system is kind of a part of the industrialized agriculture model. It's because you're growing monoculture crops and you're feeding it to livestock, and usually it's in the form of grains. And like in the US, it's been corn, and Canada is usually barley or wheat or whatever. But the cattle itself is they're ruminant animals, so they take cellulose materials into the rumen, and the microbiology breaks that down and eventually turns it into protein, and so that's the natural system, and that's part of that adds to the ecosystem. And the way it was before we had cattle on this land, there was bison and buffalo, and the indigenous people had, they harvested bison and buffalo, and the grasslands were tremendous, and so that they were just part of the system, and so the cattle are just part of the system. So the ecosystem will deteriorate if you take livestock out of a grassland scenario.
So they literally are working the land. They are a tool and they belong there.
Yes, exactly. If we learned from Alan Savory that there's a different. He put the ecosystems on a scale of, like, I think 1 to 10, and the brittleness of the ecosystem, like a rainforest is high, and a desert is like low. And the reason the desert is like low is because it's hot and dry. It doesn't get very much rain. So in a rainforest area, they get lots of rain, and so rainforests generally have very shallow topsoil, because all the microbiological activity is happening on top, because it's moist and warm. But in the prairie lands and where the grasslands are, it's hot and dry. So it all boils down to microbiology. There has to be a microbe to break down that plant material. So that's why the ruminants become so important, because the rumen is a great big bag, and it's full of microbes. So the ruminants put the grass in the bag, and the microbes are in the bag. Microbes would survive in a hot, dry environment if it wasn't for that ruminant to be packing them around in that big rumen. And so it's just another way that nature has been able to break down plant material and recycle it, is with the, so they become very important. You have to have these ruminants when you got grassland scenarios. And of course, the ruminants are self-sustaining and they look after themselves, and for the most part. Whereas if you have to grow crops and on that land and sell and go through all them inputs, and with the fuel and the fertilizers and the chemicals and the machinery and the money that takes to do all that stuff, then to grow corn and then turn around, or corn and wheat and then just turn around and feed it to livestock.
It actually is nonsensical. It doesn't make sense.
It does not make sense.
Yeah.
But the natural way does make sense. And of course, the ruminants get a bad rap for methane release, et cetera. But in a natural ecosystem, like breaking down plant material, cellulose, there's very little methane released, and of course there's a lot more carbon sinking, and we're going to discuss that later. But just by the fact grasslands, and you won't have grasslands without a ruminant, because the grass has to be harvested so the sunlight can get to the growing points. Otherwise, it'll just die. And so ruminants are if without ruminants in a grassland, you won't have a grassland. But they've become a tool to build our ecosystem, harvesting the grass, part of the solar chain conversion. They're the main tool for product conversion.
Fantastic. So, okay, let's go. We've got number 5, intensive plant cover management.
Intensive plant cover management, it means to create that energy conversion, sun's energy conversion. You need a lot of plant material they're all photocells, like the plant's just photocells capturing sun's energy and converting it to plant material. And so we look at our land maybe as being a big gigantic solar panel, and the plants on it are the cell of the photocells that, like in a solar panel, you'd have photocells in a solar panel capturing sun's energy, photons converting to electricity. Whereas the plant material is your land is your big solar panel, and your plants are your photocells and capturing sun's energy. So you just want to have lots of those.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful explanation, because what you're saying is regenerative agriculture, it's taking solar panel and solar power, and creating food. And we could say, by contrast, industrial agriculture or the opposite. It's taking fossil fuels to create food. And this is, in many ways, it's why it's sustainable from a petroleum point of view as well as from a regenerative environment point of view.
Yes, that's correct. And of course, back, and when you bring that up too, like we never went through the testing guidelines fully. We just touched on them, but there again, that's one of the seven testing guidelines in the decision making model is the energy source and use, and the other part of that is the money, the source and the use. And so when we talk about source and use, when it comes to energy, we say, is the energy coming from a fossil fuel, or is it coming from a solar powered energy source? And how often is it used, or is it consumptive or non-consumptive? And so the worst case scenario in that is having fossil fuel being consumed, being consumptive. So your fossil fuel, you're burning lots of diesel fuel, and you keep doing it more over and over again, and so it's very consumptive. That's a fail. And so we to do that, and then but fossil fuel non-consumptive, by using it once in a while, that probably would be a pass. But then when you come to solar usage, consumptive solar unit usage would probably be a pass, but let's look at better ways to do it. The most ideal scenario would be solar energy non-consumptive. So then when you make a decision or do an action, you're always trying to say, well, is there a way that we can do this? The ideal have solar non-consumptive rather than fossil fuel consumptive, right? So when things like feeding cattle or whatever, raising livestock, the least amount of fossil fuel energy used is the best choice. And so then you make a decision or an action that will take you in that direction. And of course, having cattle, harvesting grass year round and using no fossil fuels, that's ideal. And that can be done in a lot of regions. And unfortunately, some areas the winter is with the snow cover and whatnot, it becomes a little more difficult, but it's still done. We still have bison out there grazing in the wintertime year round, so that they're so it's possible. So yes, so that's another example of how the model is used to take us in this regenerative agricultural model.
Yeah, beautiful. So if we move on to number 6, we are talking back again about soil, aren't we? Enhance the rhizosphere.
Yes, because number 6, enhanced rhizosphere, this is something that has really been overlooked for a long time. And there's been some a lot of research over the last decade into this very subject. Of course, it goes back to the work of William Albrecht, when his job was to set out to find a nitrogen fixing bacteria and for leguminous plants. And in so doing, he identified some really good microbes that would do this. And when he replicated his trials, he in different sites, he couldn't get the same results. And so when he started to study it, he realized that the chemistry was different in these other sites. So he started to adjust the chemistry, and then all of a sudden the biology took off. So when they study this further, the science finds that there's the rhizospheres, the area around the root zone. When you enhance that rhizosphere, you get a tremendous population of microorganisms, and they're actually taking nutrients from the atmosphere and or the soil and making them available to the plants. And when you look at at the roots of some of these plants that have an active rhizosphere, they're very they look like locks of dreadlocks and type. So you got a tremendous, that's an indicate, like soil particles are attached to these colonies around the roots. So that's your rhizosphere, around the root zone. And so if we can focus on that and try to enhance that, then we're going to get a lot of nutrient availability for the plants. So this is something that's really exciting.
Yeah. So essentially, we're looking beyond the mineral composition of the soil, and we're looking at the actual life within the soil at this point. And there are the interactions between the soil life, the bacteria, that are interacting with the plants and essentially taking the role of feeding the plants or enhancing how the plant is fed and receiving nutrition.
That's exactly right. So then, therefore, and so a lot of our soils have a lot of minerals in them. It's just that some of them aren't available. And the reasons they're unavailable is, one is because the chemistry is not right. And number two, the biology is not right, which in turn, the physical structure is not right for air and water to be in the soil, because an ideal soil would have 25% air and 25% water and 45% minerals and 5% carbon or organic matter. That's an ideal soil. But if the chemistry is off, that goes back to the mineral balancing the soil. And once you get the chemistry right, then the biology is very active. And the reason the biology is very active is because the physical structure of the soil is actually changed because of the chemistry. And so you got lots of room for air and water and a right environment for microbiology to flourish. Then you really start seeing lots of exciting things happening, because minerals that are unavailable in the soil become available and to the plant. And then the plant, of course, needs a balance of all these minerals to be healthy and nutrient dense. So rhizosphere enhancement is really exciting and something that we should really focus on.
Yeah. So you're kind of building up an ecosystem under the earth as well. This is alive, and I'm guessing this is a bit of a guess, but that the diversity of that ecosystem is again adding value.
Absolutely, because remember, the ecosystem blocks, the more you add, the more diversity. That's why I don't like to limit when I say step number 4, create a diverse ecosystem. I'm referring to everything. Like, that's microbiology, macrobiology. We can actually have, like, even if you had livestock on top of the soil and top of the ground eating your plants, a healthy ecosystem below the ground has got way more by weight by far than on top of the ground. It's unbelievable, like how much biology can be in our soil. And so when you see this happening, you say, this is really exciting to see healthy rhizosphere happening, nitrogen fixing nodules on the root systems of your leguminous plants, converting atmospheric nitrogen into the soil, and this rhizosphere, this unbelievable diversity of microbacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, all working in harmony to break down these minerals and make them available. So that's really exciting, and that's the exciting part of regenerative agriculture. And there's other things that we'll see further down that are really exciting too. But that rhizosphere is one that's really exciting and very beneficial, and that's the one that we should be really one of the ones that we should really highlight.
So this one, is it right to think that this is ultimately why regenerative agriculture is regenerative? Because you are providing an ecosystem that's expanding and becoming more resilient every year. And it's that's taking the role of feeding the plants. So instead of inputting nitrogen, you have this diverse amount of microorganisms that are becoming essentially the plant food.
Yes, exactly. This diversity of microorganisms is really, it's really where it's at. Microorganisms are what makes everything tick. And that's why in a non-brittle environment, the microbial activity can take place above the surface of the soil. And because it's really humid and warm and damp, but in the drier places where there's no rain, like where there's conducive to grasslands, the microbiology can't happen to break down that cellulose materials. That's why the rumen becomes so important. So we're always talking about microbiology here, and with the regenerative agriculture, that's where it's at, microbiology.
Fantastic. Okay, so number 7, build and maintain ground cover.
This is important because if we have bare ground, and the reason is it's something that we should always these steps are put in place so we don't lose sight of these things, and to make sure we try to incorporate them into our farming practices or agriculture practice. So if you have bare ground, then you haven't got photocells and you're not converting sun's energy. So it's really important to make sure that you build that ground cover and maintain that ground cover. Also, when you have ground that is covered and not bare, it's not susceptible to wind and water erosion. And so you just have to make sure you build that and maintain it. That's why I'm so fond of perennial forages, because even trees and shrubs, because once you build them and maintain them, you don't have bare ground, and you've got a lot of ground cover, and so your ecosystem blocks are going to function better.
Yeah, so they're there year on year. So they're playing a bit of a mixed role, essentially. They are protecting the soil, but also converting the energy.
Yeah, it's energy conversion and protecting the soil. That's the two main points, I think, on build and maintain ground cover. Species that would stay there for long periods of time and do well in that ecosystem, or that region of the earth or the world or whatever.
So the specific species are going to be dependent upon where you're located, but ultimately you're making sure that the ground is always covered, and establishing that ground cover is it's going to be something that's important regardless of where in the world you are.
Exactly. Yeah, solar converters and holding the soil in place from preventing wind and water erosion.
So we're starting to really understand the value of the soil as we go through these. We're seeing that the health of the soil, the life within the soil, is all incredibly important. So these next 2 steps, 7 and 8, 8 and 9, they're working upon this value of the soil. So number 8, we've got minimal soil disturbance.
Yes, minimal soil disturbance is ideally would be that long-term perennial diversity of species, plant species. But if you're going to grow some annual crops, for annual cropping, then you would want to make sure that you, if you were going to do any type of soil disturbance, like tillage or whatever, that would be very, very minimal. You might till your soil maybe 2 to 3 inches, just very shallow, for 2 reasons. One is to incorporate plant biomass to feed the microbiological community rapidly. And so if we're going to grow an annual crop, then they could help build the soil. And one way of doing to build soil is to grow a crop and then incorporate it into the soil to feed the microbiology. I think some people call it green manuring. And so that's a way to feed the microbiology and incorporate some of this, and to get your nutrition up to grow this annual crop that you're going to grow. And another reason to do it minimal is because you don't want to disturb that the microbiological community that's developed in that soil. And so usually the microbiological community in our soils in our region is in that top 6 inches, because that's where they can get access to air and water.
Okay. So if you come through with a really deep plough, the sort of standard plough, you're going to essentially disturb the work that you've done.
Yes, exactly. That the microbiological community that you've created, it's going to set it back significantly if you go down where they're living, and they live in that top 6 inches. That's where the most of them. There's many different species of microbiological organisms down deeper, but my understanding is the majority of them are up in that top surface, essentially where a fence post would rot. Why it's rotting is because the microbiology is working, and so that zone, you don't want to disturb that zone too much. Deep tillage or something, or plowing or something, is you've really set it back is what you're doing. And so how long to get it back again depends on them other steps that you do.
Okay. And then if we move to number 9, sequester carbon, tell us about how that can be benefited, or how it benefits the farming practices.
Well, it's when I seen that that site, when at my one of my clients showed me where the old fence line was, and it was off the property line, so they were going to move the fence over about 3 meters, and so taking the old fence out, and of course that old fence was the borderline between the one farm and the other farm for maybe 80 to 100 years, and or maybe, I'm guessing, but it's not that long. It hasn't been farmed that long, but anyways, 60 to 80 years for sure. And then they cultivated they tilled the soil on both sides of the property line, and there was just this black strip down the middle of it, where the old fence line was. And of course, that had never been tilled, and that was the original kind of prairie type soil. And to see on one side of the line, the soil was actually white, just very white colored, and on the other side of the property line, where it was mostly pasture because it was just a narrow little strip, it wasn't really intensively farmed that much, and it was kind of gray. So it was an indication that the carbon is gone and missing. It's been harvested out, and of course we see that on our statistics on our prairie soils in Canada and the U.S. that then since they started farming the prairie soils, that the carbon levels have been dropping. They were 5 or 6% to start, and now they're down to 1 and 2%. So the carbon is being mined out of the soil, and of course the great gold in the soil is carbon, and with that, the carbon is what this makes the soil nutrients happen, soil microbiology happen. It's like the football field for all the microbiology and everything to function and happen on. And so when you deplete that, and of course, and it's tremendous amount of water holding capacity, and so and it's the basis of your soil structure and everything. So if you got no carbon in your soil, like ideally you need 5%. If you haven't got no carbon in your soil, if you got low numbers of carbon levels, then your whole system is in jeopardy. So we have to enhance that carbon, and so the way to do that is to capture carbon from the atmosphere and put it back into the soil. And the way to do that is through plant material, photosynthesizing sun's energy, and the plant makes carbohydrates, and they put them back into the soil through the plant exudates that are going into the soil. So it's actually, I always say, like the maple tree. When we tap in Canada the maple tree to get the maple syrup that we're so famous for, that they're tapping into that. They're stealing some of the carbon that's supposed to go down into the soil. It's that's tremendous carbon production. And so if we have green plant material photosynthesizing sun's energy, we're creating carbon sink, and it's ending up into our soil, and so through the plant exudates. So the more plant cover we have, and the longer we're growing it, from soon as the sun starts shining and the ground thaws out here, if we're growing plant material converting sun's energy, we're sinking carbon and into the soil. And so the point then is to make sure that we do all those other things, the mother steps we just talked about. And if we got perennial grasslands and shrubs and trees and whatnot that are sinking carbon into the soil, throughout the whole growing season. That's from the time it warms up till the time it starts getting cold again in our area. And I've seen it where we can reverse that white soil and start turning it back to gray and then eventually back to black and dark soil. And that's what we want to do. And so number 10 is the monitoring and whatnot, and testing and monitoring. So we can see where these carbon levels are increasing, and through regenerative agriculture, we can replenish and sink the carbon that's in the atmosphere. So it's a great regenerative agriculture is actually, I think, the main tool we have to sequester our carbon, that excess carbon that's in our atmosphere.
Yeah, which is going to be compounded by the fact that if you're regeneratively farming, then you are putting carbon into the soil as you produce the food. Whereas if you are not doing that and you're doing the standardized system of farming, that's doing the opposite. That is putting the carbon into the atmosphere or into, it's depleting the soil essentially.
Exactly, yeah. And there's a couple other things it does too. With the application of like fertilizers and stuff, it produces nitrous oxide gases, and that's one of the contributing effects for climate change too. And so a whole bunch of other things come into play, but one of the main ones is carbon sink. Regenerative agriculture is one of the greatest tools that we have to sink that carbon back, put it back into the ground where it belongs.
So pretty much all of the steps, or almost all of the steps that we've gone through already, they are contributing to the capture of carbon.
Exactly. Yeah, it's all leading up to that.
And then number 10, you're monitoring and you're testing, so you can actually quantify that what the work is, it's being successful in this approach. It's putting the carbon back there. You can see that.
Yes, and step number 10, like monitoring and testing and measuring. One benefit is to monitor and test and monitor that carbon level. There again, it's very general. You can test and monitor and measure everything on the farm. We try to measure and monitor everything. So it's very important to, like soil testing and plant tissue or plant sap analysis, measuring to see where you're at. Monitoring your bank account. I mean, it just goes and goes and goes. So it's very important to. That's why I put it there, because you have to test, measure, and monitor, and basically that's part of the holistic management model that Alan Savory developed. Was one of the last parts of the model is to monitor and test and monitor and plan. And monitor, and then if the plan goes off, replan. And so it's a circle. So you plan, and then you assume you're wrong, and then you monitor it. And if the plan starts to deviate, then you replan and implement your new plan. So it's a circle. That's part of the testing of the holistic model, is that circle. So that's why I think it's really important to make sure that we monitor and do testing and measuring to enable to monitor what's going on in the soil, in the plants, in the animals, in our lives. And so it's part of it.
So the holistic approach, as we've mentioned, it's more complicated to get your mind around, but essentially it's offering this continual evolution and potential for growth, because you're always looking back, you're checking in, you're improving, you're monitoring, you're improving again. So even if we spoke about this in 5 years' time, you would probably be saying, yeah, we've continued to expand, we've continued to develop, and we've got more to teach you.
That's one thing I've learned, is we're learning something new every day, and if we want to learn something, we read an old book, so we pay attention to that one. It is very important to test and measure and monitor.
We're getting towards the last ones now. We've got climate rehabilitation. This seems like it's We've talked about building diversity in ecosystems. We've talked about supporting the climate by sequestering carbon. Can you expand on that one at all? Is there any more to add?
Well, I think there's many factors that are affected. Personally, we see climate change happening on our farm, and so we have to deal with that every year. We see something changing, and not necessarily to the good. It's usually to the detriment of what's happening in our ecosystem. There's many things that are contributing to climate change. Of course, excess carbon release is one, but I think some of the other ones that regenerative agriculture addresses is the ground cover, and it cools it's got a cooling effect on the atmosphere, and the sun's just bouncing off bare ground and heating this surface of the earth. So if you got plant material and if you got a thick diversity system, it's going to create a cooling effect. And of course that goes, we could start talking about the oceans too, but just dealing with the land. But so climate rehabilitation, I think regenerative agriculture with all those steps helps to address and rehabilitate our climate. So just the whole model, the different models that are put in place in order to do regenerative agriculture, the way we grow crops, the way we grow livestock, different models, they're going to all have a beneficial effect to the climate rehabilitation.
So we often think about climate change as the big whole planetary system, but there's microclimates too, which I suppose we can see. We can actually we can bypass a field that's been ploughed and it's almost like a desert. It's just this dry, bare ground. Or then we could sort of look at a photo or an image of something where it's been farmed regeneratively, and we see lush vegetation and we see green and we see plant cover. And it's quite clear from that stark contrast that we don't have to look up to the atmosphere and measure the gas up there to see that the way we farm can contribute to the impact of the climate. We can see, like you've mentioned, temperature. We've got the microclimate temperature. It's going to have an effect on the moisture and the water cycles. So I think people can look to regenerative agriculture to see with their own eyes, to connect them to the impact that, this black and white difference between regenerating and then depleting, which I think we see too much of. We see this farming practice that is, as you've literally called it, mining the carbon out of the soil. And it's just tipping that all on its head. And instead of agriculture being this biggest contributor to climate damage, or one of the biggest contributors, it actually becomes one of the biggest solutions.
Yes, absolutely. That's I think that you just said the absolute hit the nail on the head with the hammer, so to speak. And there's been studies of this too. It's just, but I'm a firm believer that we can help rehabilitate our climate with regenerative agriculture. It's very doable. It's just we just need to have. I guess that's why I'm talking to you today.
It's I think connecting that solution and that knowledge and that awareness with as many people as possible.
Yeah. And I'm a farmer. That's where I'm coming from. This is what our whole life has been doing, is farming and trying to figure out how to create a better ecosystem in order for us to make a living, and for the next generation to make a living and on off the land. And that's kind of why we're talking about it here today, is to try to teach people what it means to us as farmers, what regenerative agriculture has meant to us and how we got there, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think perhaps overwhelmingly the success of it, because you're talking about a system that has actually saved you from another catastrophe or a failure within a business practice. It has taken you into something that, you are so successful as a farmer now that you're teaching other people. And that's a very different story to your experience with doing it the old way or the modern way.
That's true. That is very true. Yes. Since we started on this journey of regenerative agriculture and the 11 steps that we've talked about, we feel very successful at what we've done. That's why I'm sharing these 12 steps, because I want others to be successful, and particularly the younger people that are starting out. And so I really enjoy working with young agrarians and getting them, passing on some of this knowledge so they overcome some of the problems before they exist. That's kind of the last one that I can think of on this number 12, and we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, it's brought us completely directly to it. So this is what you mean by number 12, building the health and vitality for the agrarian community. This is educating, sharing your knowledge. Is that what you mean by that?
Yes, it's that is it. It's creating an environment for the next generation, or the farmers that are there, but also mainly for the next generation, because it's really, really difficult in our area and lots of areas around the world for the next generation to get involved in agriculture. I say we have to enhance the system for the next generation, or the young farmers, to become part of it, become farmers. So regenerative agriculture, I think, is one of the main models that will enable our younger farmers, or the next generation farmers, to get to come into agriculture, because it's really, really difficult with this industrialized model we have. We see our farmers disappearing. In my career, we've seen like our farm size went from in our area like 640 acres, maybe now we're into it's like 15,000 acres of land that people are farming to make a living, and so that's placed thousands and thousands and thousands of farmers. And of course, that model doesn't allow for new farmers. So we have to create a system where we have to have communities of, like I said, health and vitality for agrarian communities. I'm maybe from the old school, but the communities that I grew up in were more of the traditional agricultural practices. We had smaller villages, and that we sold our products into. Our meat and our eggs and milk and dairy products, and we did all that when I was growing up on the farm, and most all the farms did similar things. They had the cream cans that we haul once a week, take the cream into town, and that was the money for the buying the groceries or whatever that we needed in town. So it was, and so that built community. All the village that I grew up had, they were just going out, but they had flour mills, and they had dairies, local dairies, had local meat processing facilities. And now we don't have that, and we lack our communities. So we have to create these communities again, recreate these communities, and we have to build health and vitality in these agrarian communities. So communities that have diversity in agricultural and feeding the local people, and having the infrastructure in place that would allow for this, like the processing, the mills and the abattoirs and the sausage makers and the candlestick makers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's taking in a lot of ways, it's taking things backwards towards a vision that is it is more holistic in that whole form of, you're going to reduce transportation, you're going to reduce food waste, you're going to get the food to table quicker, so you've got greater nutritional value right there in people's hands. And then also you've got that feeling of community, which I think we can't put a price on, because you are supporting one another and you're building up something that goes far beyond the science of actually farming. You're introducing something that completes the picture. And have you found that people are open and willing to take this type of direction, or is this going to be something that we are needing to get people on board with and start developing?
Well, it's pleasantly surprising that, like 20 years ago, it was just like none of this stuff was talked about, and since over the last 10 years, people are doing some of these things. Like our daughter came, and she came to the farm and started a CSA and started supplying the local village or the local town with vegetables. And she had about 70 families that she was providing fresh vegetables to for the growing season and also into the winter months. And now has gotten married, and her husband built their own farm, and they're doing the same thing, and they're producing nutrient dense food. They're practicing all of these things, these steps that we've talked about, and they're developing building community around that farm. They call it the homestead, and so they're feeding families that are in the city, that they got a city about an hour away from their farm. So they're building this community, and that's what we need. That's what I mean by vitality for an agrarian community. That agrarian community, it goes beyond the farm. It goes to the people that are consuming these products. So it's the people that live in these villages and these towns and cities that are part of this agrarian community now. And so this is what we have to build, and this is what we have to develop. And once you start building this communities, and all of this is part and parcel to the regenerative agriculture. Without these communities, regenerative agriculture it will be difficult to achieve. So that's why I think it's number 12 is the, without number 12 you won't have none of the rest.
So in a lot of ways, this is about our ecosystem as humans, as communities and society, how we can each be a part of the whole ecosystem. And that puts it into everybody's hands, doesn't it? It makes it relevant. What we're talking about today is hugely valuable to farmers who are looking to get into regenerative practices, but it's actually relevant to everybody. As I started out at the beginning, it's us as purchasers and people that eat food, which, as far as I'm aware, is most of us. We are all part of the solution. We're all we need to get engaged with that and start to realize perhaps a little more where our food comes from.
Exactly. This is my that's what I envision and what it would take, and that's exactly what it has to be. Everybody has to get on board and feel part of it and realize it. And so that's where it comes to educating. So what you're doing right now and what I'm doing right now is so important to educate people to get this message out there that we have to build these agrarian communities, and we're all the consumers are just as much part and parcel of that as the farmer out there that's growing the crop. And so that's why I started writing down these different steps, something to get off the treadmill and get off the industrialized agricultural model and try and get something different, get off the dependency of inputs and all them five I mentioned, the chemicals, fertilizers, and the fuels, and the machinery, and the money to do all that stuff. We have to get off that treadmill or that dependency, and create a different system, a regenerative agricultural system that becomes less dependent on support systems, and less less risky it is, and the more build the ecosystem, build the soil, build the nutrient density in our food and community, and so yeah, that's number 12.
That's fantastic. And I think that your daughter taking it up, taking your education and your lead and starting her own farm, I think that's a huge testament that what you're doing works, and you're doing a fantastic job with it all.
Yeah, yeah. It's and there's another group that started up about 5 years ago, or 6 or 7 maybe, the Young Agrarians, and there's probably other groups around, but that's really exciting to see that they've got a bit of an organization, and it's a growing organization, part of the getting the message out there. So and they've got an internship program where young people or people that are interested to learn some of these steps come and participate and learn, and so that's exciting.
Yeah, fantastic. We'll pop some links then to their group. So if anybody is looking to learn more, that's a really good one that they can be pointed to. And then anything else that you can recommend, we'll discuss that, and we'll include it also.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for speaking to us. I feel it's so valuable what you're sharing, and it's not just to put out the actual principles, but to speak with you and to see your enthusiasm and how these practices have transformed the way that you farm, and you've made a success of it. I think that really speaks volumes.
Yes. Well, thank you, and thank you for the job that you're doing, because I think that's what you're doing is so important, and that's something that I'm not that good at doing. So what you're doing is really appreciated, and I hope you carry on and keep doing what you're doing and get the message out there. And if there's something further, like we want to go into deeper in some of these things that down the road, I'm more than willing to share some of my because we've touched on these things, but so if there's something else down the road, don't hesitate to get in touch with me, and we'll explore some of them. But
fantastic. Thank you. It's it's been an absolute pleasure, and it's really generous of you, and I really do appreciate it. It's been wonderful to speak with you.
Yeah, and if you ever are our way, just stop by for a farm tour.
That would be fantastic. Thank you. And thank you for listening to this episode of We Are Carbon. Next time, we'll be joined by Adrian Ferrero, CEO of Biomakers. We're extending our understanding of soil microbes further and exploring the value of true data and analysis of these communities as a tool for moving things forward in our transition to a more regenerative world. You can keep up to date with everything from We Are Carbon by subscribing on the website or following along on Instagram. Search for wearecarbon.earth. And let's keep figuring this all out together.